The morning sun filtered through the thick canopy of trees that bordered the Wren family's cottage. Birds chirped merrily, and the scent of wet earth lingered in the air after last night's rain. Maddie Wren skipped across the lawn, her tennis ball tucked in one hand, eyes fixed on Scout, the family's excitable golden retriever. Scout had always been a bit of a mystery. Despite his friendly demeanor, there was something about him that Maddie could never quite put her finger on. Perhaps it was his way of tilting his head, his alert eyes that never seemed to miss a thing, or the occasional moments when he would stare out into the woods for what felt like hours, as though watching something invisible. That morning, though, Scout was doing something a little more unusual. He wasn't chasing the tennis ball or lounging in the sun. No, Scout was digging. Deep. Maddie stopped in her tracks, blinking in surprise. The spot where he was working was in the far corner of the garden, where the soil was always a little looser, as if the earth had once been disturbed and never fully settled. She'd never thought much about that corner before, just a patch of garden that seemed to be forgotten by the rest of the yard. But Scout was determined. His paws moved furiously, kicking up clumps of soil that landed in a scattered mess around him. His tail wagged in rhythmic excitement, as though he were on the brink of finding something important. "Scout, stop. What are you doing?" Maddie called, but the dog didn't listen. He kept digging, his nose and paws working with incredible speed. A small mound of dirt formed around him, and the hole deepened. Maddie couldn't help but approach. As she knelt beside him, her fingers brushed the edge of what seemed like a solid object buried beneath the dirt. Her heart skipped a beat. She brushed away more soil, her hands shaking with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. The object beneath the surface didn't feel like a rock or a root. It was metal. "Scout," she whispered urgently, grabbing the dog's collar and pulling him back. "What is this?" The dog whined but obediently backed away, as if understanding that his digging had led to something significant. Maddie looked down at what she had uncovered, a small, rusted metal corner, the edges faintly gleaming in the sunlight. It was an old chest, no larger than a shoebox, with ornate carvings along its edges. But it had no lock or keyhole, just a heavy latch that looked long sealed by time. "Mom, Dad," Maddie shouted, running toward the house. She didn't wait for them to answer. She knew they would come. Within moments, her parents appeared at the door. Her father, Mark Wren, raised an eyebrow at the sight of the hole in the garden and the small chest lying in the dirt. "What have you found now, Maddie?" he asked, a playful tone in his voice, but there was a curious spark in his eyes. "I don't know. Scout just started digging, and look what he found." She knelt beside the chest, her fingers still brushing against the cold metal. Clara, Maddie's mother, frowned. "That's strange. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before. It looks old." Mark squatted down beside his daughter, examining the box. "It's probably just a forgotten item someone buried here years ago. People used to bury things like this for safekeeping." But Maddie was already shaking her head. "No, it feels different. Like it's important." She paused, her fingers grazing the carvings. The intricate patterns seemed familiar, yet she couldn't place them. Her grandfather, Arthur Wren, stepped outside then, leaning heavily on his cane. His graying hair caught the sunlight, and there was something in his gait that suggested he had seen much in his long life. Too much, perhaps, for a man who now lived quietly with his family. Arthur eyed the chest with an unreadable expression, his old eyes narrowing as he took in the carvings. His lips parted, but it wasn't a smile that greeted them. "That symbol," he murmured, stepping closer. His voice was low, as if he had just stumbled upon a ghost from his past. "I know that symbol." Maddie looked up at her grandfather. "What do you mean, Grandpa?" Arthur's weathered face seemed to age in an instant, as if the weight of the years had come crashing down on him. He slowly sank to a nearby bench, resting his hands on his knees. "That symbol," he said again, more firmly now. "I saw it once many years ago when I was a boy. My father, he told me about it." Mark looked at him curiously. "What symbol?" "Grandpa, you're scaring us." Arthur didn't answer immediately. He studied the chest with a grim expression, then finally spoke. "It's the crest of the Ivy Wolves." The ivy wolves? Clara repeated, furrowing her brow. What are you talking about? Arthur's eyes met hers, and for a moment, it was as if the years had fallen away, and he was the same young man he had once been. His voice, when it came, was filled with the weight of a secret long buried. When I was young, my father told me stories about a group of outlaws, men who lived in these woods. They were called the Ivy Wolves. They were thieves, yes, but more than that. They were protectors of a secret, a treasure that no one could ever find unless they were worthy. He paused, his voice thick with memory. They left clues, riddles, hidden things, and many believed it was just folklore. But I know better now. This, he gestured at the chest. This is the beginning of something much larger than we understand. Maddie's pulse quickened. She glanced from the chest to her father and then back at her grandfather. You think this is related to the treasure? Arthur nodded slowly. I do. A chill ran through Maddie as the weight of his words settled in. This wasn't just a random find. This was something much more, something that could change their lives forever. And it was only just beginning. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth as Maddie and her family sat around the small, worn table in the kitchen. The chest, now cleaned off and resting on the center of the table, seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Arthur had returned to his chair by the fire, his face grave as he continued to explain the legend of the Ivy Wolves. They were outlaws, yes, but they weren't your typical thieves. They didn't steal for greed. They took from the corrupt, the powerful, and they hid what they took, not for themselves, but for those who truly needed it. He paused, his weathered hands clasped in his lap. My father always said the Ivy Wolves were guardians of something far greater than gold or jewels. They protected knowledge, secrets, a treasure that could change the world if it was ever found. Maddie leaned forward, her heart pounding in her chest. What kind of treasure? Arthur's eyes seemed distant, as if he were looking back into a time long past. A treasure of knowledge, Maddie. A treasure that could uncover truths about the land, about the people who lived here, and about the dark secrets hidden in the history of this very village. My father never told me exactly where it was, but he said that one day, someone would find the right clues and uncover it. Mark exchanged a glance with Clara, then turned to Maddie. Do you believe him, Maddie? Is this what you think we're dealing with? Maddie's fingers brushed the surface of the chest again, the intricate carvings now more familiar to her. The symbols, the ivy, the shape of the wolf's head, they all felt like pieces of a puzzle, just out of reach. But something deep inside her told her that her grandfather wasn't simply telling an old story.
He was warning them.
I don't know, she said quietly. But I think we need to find out. Arthur nodded slowly. The Ivy Wolves weren't just hiding treasure. They left behind a trail, a series of clues. If we're lucky, this chest might be the first one. It might be the key. Clara's face twisted in concern. Arthur, you're talking about outlaws and hidden treasure. We don't even know if any of this is true. We could be chasing shadows. But Arthur was undeterred. I don't think this is just a story, Clara. I've seen things in my time, heard whispers. There's always been something off about the land around here, something that doesn't fit. And when I see that symbol, I know it's not just folklore. It's real. There was a heavy silence in the room as the family processed his words. Maddie felt a thrill rush through her. Whatever this treasure was, whatever secrets it held, it was clear that they had just stepped into something much bigger than they had ever imagined. Mark leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. All right, let's assume for a moment that your grandfather's right, and this chest is the first clue. What now? Maddie's eyes lit up. We figure out the riddle. Arthur nodded approvingly.
Yes.
The riddle is the key. I haven't heard it in years, but I remember the words. They always made me feel like it was just a matter of time before someone uncovered the truth. Maddie grabbed the scroll from the chest and unrolled it once more. Her eyes traced the old, faded ink. Where shadows pass and secrets sleep, beyond the reach of roots grown deep, a path once marked by feathered flight will guide the brave to buried light. The first part is easy. Maddie said, reading aloud. Where shadows pass and secrets sleep. That could be anywhere in the woods. The woods are full of shadows. Clara frowned. But it says, beyond the reach of roots grown deep. What does that mean? Arthur leaned forward, a glint of recognition in his eyes. Roots. I've seen something like that before. There's a place deep in Weathersby Wood, near the old chapel. It's where the trees grow thickest, where the roots twist and turn, like they're hiding something beneath. Mark raised an eyebrow. A chapel? You mean that old ruin near Widow's Crest? Arthur nodded. Yes, that's the place. The chapel has been abandoned for centuries, but it's said to have once been a gathering place for the Ivy Wolves. It's where they would meet, discuss their plans, and possibly where they left more clues. Maddie felt a surge of excitement. So, we go to the chapel. Maybe the next clue is there. Arthur smiled faintly. It's worth a try. But be careful. The Ivy Wolves weren't just about treasure. They had enemies. And their enemies were just as clever as they were. We're not the only ones searching for what they left behind. Clara's face tightened with worry. We don't even know what we're looking for, or what's waiting for us. But Maddie wasn't deterred. It's the adventure, Mum. We can't just let this go. We have to see it through. Mark stood up and stretched. All right. I think we've got our first destination. Let's see what's left in that old chapel. The family made their plans for the next day. They would leave early, pack enough supplies for a day of hiking through Weathersby Wood, and explore the chapel near Widow's Crest. But as they prepared to head out, Maddie felt the weight of the riddle in her mind. A path once marked by feathered flight. Feathered flight. What did that mean? Was it literal? Or was it another clue, hidden in plain sight? That night, as Maddie lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, as though the Ivy Wolves themselves were keeping an eye on their every move. But that didn't stop her. If anything, it made her more determined. Tomorrow, the journey would truly begin. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, a mist creeping through the trees of Weathersby Wood as the Wren family packed their bags. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, and Maddie couldn't shake the feeling that the weather mirrored the uncertainty in her chest. There was something out there, deep in the woods, and they were about to uncover it. Scout bounded excitedly around the yard, tail wagging as he waited for the journey to begin. Maddie slipped a leash onto his collar, and together, they joined her parents and grandfather by the car. We'll need to follow the old trail that runs along Widow's Crest, Arthur said as he surveyed the map. It's the best route to get to the chapel. But we'll need to keep our wits about us. The path has changed over the years, and there's always the chance we'll stumble upon something unexpected. Mark loaded the backpacks into the trunk, glancing at his father-in-law. You don't sound too confident about this. Arthur's face was unreadable. Confidence is a luxury. What matters is caution. The Ivy Wolves were clever. If they wanted to leave something hidden for centuries, they wouldn't make it easy for anyone to find. Maddie couldn't help but feel the thrill of danger stirring in her chest. This was no longer just about solving a riddle or finding treasure. This was about something much bigger, about uncovering a forgotten chapter of history, a secret buried in the earth. It felt like the first step in a much larger story. The drive to the edge of Weathersby Wood took longer than expected. By the time they arrived, the mist had turned into a steady drizzle, making the forest seem even more mysterious. Towering trees loomed overhead, their thick branches nearly blocking the light. The path leading to Widow's Crest was narrow and overgrown, the remnants of an old stone wall visible in patches along the way. As they hiked deeper into the woods, the sounds of the modern world faded away. The only noise was the rhythmic tapping of raindrops against the leaves and the crunch of twigs underfoot. Scout trotted ahead, nose to the ground, sniffing the wet earth. Maddie couldn't help but smile at the dog's enthusiasm, though a small part of her wondered if Scout had a deeper sense of the journey ahead. It almost seemed like he was leading them, rather than just following along. I'll admit, this place feels different, Mark said as he glanced around. Like it's holding a lot of secrets. Arthur grunted. It does. The chapel is just ahead, but don't expect it to look like it did back in the day. Time hasn't been kind to the old stonework. The chapel was nestled at the base of Widow's Crest, hidden behind a veil of thick ivy and moss. The stones that made up its walls were weathered and crumbling, but it still stood, stubborn and quiet. The arched doorway was partially obscured by the overgrowth, and the roof had long since caved in. Yet, there was an eerie beauty to it, like a forgotten monument waiting to be rediscovered. Maddie felt a strange pull toward it, as though something invisible was beckoning her inside. "This is it," Arthur murmured, leading the way. "The place where the ivy wolves once gathered. Whatever we find here will tell us more about them. And maybe more about us." They entered the chapel cautiously, the air inside damp and cold. Dust danced in the shafts of light that filtered through the broken roof, casting a haunting glow on the remains of stained glass windows. The floor was littered with debris, the remnants of forgotten rituals long past. Scout, always the curious one, darted forward, his paws clattering against the stone. Maddie's heart raced as she followed, her footsteps echoing in the vast silence of the chapel. As they moved deeper into the ruin, the air grew heavier, as though the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. "We need to find any markings, anything that could help us solve the next part of the riddle," Arthur said, his voice low. Maddie scanned the walls carefully, her eyes flicking from one broken window to the next. Then something caught her attention, a symbol, faint but visible, carved into one of the stone columns near the altar. It was the same symbol from the chest. The wolf's head wrapped in ivy. "This is it," she whispered. "We're on the right track." Arthur nodded, his expression somber. "The ivy wolves left their mark here. It's not just a symbol. It's a warning, too." Maddie stepped closer to the column, running her fingers over the worn stone. The carving was deeper than the rest, almost as if someone had spent hours working on it. She could feel the history in the stone, the hands of those who had created it, the purpose behind their actions. "What does it mean, Grandpa?" she asked. "It means we're getting closer," Arthur replied. "But it's not just a symbol. It's a key. The ivy wolves didn't just leave us riddles. They left us the path to follow. This symbol is telling us that we're on the right track." Maddie nodded, her heart racing. They had found the first clue, but something told her this was only the beginning. The chapel was old, but it felt like a living thing, hiding its secrets in the shadows. Then Scout started barking. His voice echoed through the chapel, bouncing off the crumbling walls. "Scout, quiet," Mark called, but the dog wasn't listening. He was fixated on something near the altar, his tail stiff and ears forward. Maddie's eyes followed the dog's gaze. There, partially hidden beneath the rubble, was something gleaming, something metallic, catching the light. Maddie's pulse quickened. "What is that?" She hurried over, carefully moving pieces of stone and broken wood away. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal, and then she gasped. It was a trapdoor, old and covered in dirt and debris, but unmistakable. The hinges were rusted, and the edges were barely visible, but it was definitely there. "We've found it," Arthur said, his voice thick with awe. "The entrance to what they were hiding." Mark stepped forward. "What do you think it leads to?" Arthur's eyes gleamed with excitement. "Only one way to find out." Maddie knelt beside the trapdoor and grasped the rusted handle, her fingers slipping as she tried to lift it. It groaned in protest, but with a little effort, it cracked open. Below was darkness. A steep staircase led downward, into the unknown. "Here we go," Maddie whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was colder in the stairwell beneath the trapdoor, the dampness seeping into Maddie's bones as she peered down into the inky blackness below. She could hear nothing but the rhythmic sound of her own breathing and the faint rustling of Scout's fur as he nudged closer, sniffing the air with curiosity. The dog's earlier excitement had settled into a low, eager whine. Maddie's heart hammered in her chest. They had uncovered the entrance to something ancient, something that had been hidden away for centuries. There was no turning back now. "Should we go down?" Mark's voice cut through the silence, a mixture of concern and curiosity in his tone. Arthur, who had been silent up until this point, was the first to move. His weathered hands gripped the edges of the trapdoor, pulling it back further to reveal the stone stairs leading into the darkness below. He turned to the family, his face grim but resolute. "I think we've already answered that question," Arthur said. The ivy wolves weren't afraid of the dark. They thrived in it. Maddie swallowed, feeling a chill crawl up her spine. It wasn't the dark that bothered her. It was the unknown. The deeper they went, the more she felt as if the past was reaching out to meet them, and she wasn't sure whether it would bring answers or danger. With a deep breath, she glanced at her parents, who nodded in silent agreement. "Let's go," Maddie said, her voice firmer than she felt. They descended into the darkness one by one, the flickering light of their flashlights barely cutting through the thick air. Scout trotted ahead, sniffing the stone walls, his bark echoing through the tunnel. Maddie's flashlight beam danced over the worn stone steps, each one a reminder of the age of the place they were exploring. The staircase seemed to stretch on forever, winding downward into the bowels of the earth. The walls were jagged, the air musty, and the further they went, the heavier the silence became. It was as though they were walking through time itself, each step carrying them deeper into history. Finally, they reached the bottom, the stone floor of the chamber colder than anything they'd felt above ground. The space was vast, its ceiling high and vaulted, disappearing into shadow. The flickering light of their flashlights revealed an ancient stone chamber, its walls lined with cryptic symbols and markings, and at the far end, a large, weathered wooden chest. Maddie felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end as her flashlight beams swept over the chest. It was identical to the one Scout had unearthed in the garden, the same ornate carvings, the same ivy-wrapped wolf symbol. "There it is," she whispered, her voice almost reverent. Arthur took a deep breath. The treasure. But remember, it's not just about gold. It's about what they were protecting. Mark approached the chest cautiously, bending down to examine it. "Looks like it's locked. Any ideas how we get it open?" Arthur stepped forward, examining the chest with a mixture of awe and suspicion. His fingers brushed against the carvings once more. This chest was never meant to be opened by just anyone. The ivy wolves weren't fools. They left us clues, but they also left a warning. We need to solve the riddle. Maddie stepped closer, her flashlight flicking over the chest's surface. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary old box, but there was something about it. The way the carvings seemed to shift under the light, almost as though they were alive. She could feel a presence in the room, an unseen force that was both welcoming and unsettling. Suddenly, her light caught something different. A small, hidden compartment along the side of the chest. Maddie's heart skipped a beat. She ran her fingers along the edge and gently pried it open. Inside, there was a rolled-up piece of parchment, sealed with a wax emblem. The symbol on the seal was the same as the one on the chest. Arthur's eyes widened. The map. Maddie carefully unrolled the parchment. It was old, its edges frayed and fragile, but the map itself was unmistakable. The drawing depicted a detailed landscape of Weathersby Wood, but it was marked with strange symbols and landmarks that Maddie had never seen before. There was no doubt in her mind. This was a map to something even greater than they had anticipated. Is this a map to the treasure?" Maddie asked, her voice barely a whisper. Arthur leaned in, studying the map carefully. "It's not just a map. It's a guide. A guide to where the ivy wolves hid what they protected. This map is showing us not just the land, but the layers beneath it. The place where their true treasure lies." Maddie's fingers traced the path on the map, her heart racing. The route marked with symbols seemed to lead through the heart of Weathersby Wood, toward an area she knew well, a place called the Hollow. It was an old, forgotten part of the woods, a place where few dared to go. The trees were dense, and the air there always seemed heavier, as though it held a secret. But what was hidden in the Hollow? She glanced at her grandfather. "The Hollow. Is that where the treasure is?" Arthur nodded gravely. "It's possible. The Hollow has always been off-limits. I've heard stories about strange things happening there. People who went in never came back." Clara, who had been silent up until this point, stepped forward, her expression tense. But we can't just follow this map blindly. We don't know what we'll find in the hollow, or what dangers are waiting. I don't think we have a choice, Maddie said. The map is leading us there, and we need to find out what's buried beneath. If the Ivy Wolves were protecting something, it could change everything we know about this place, about our history. Mark frowned but nodded. All right, we'll follow the map. But we'll need to be cautious. This isn't just some treasure hunt. It's a journey into the past. Arthur stepped back, his hands clasped behind his back. The journey will test you, Maddie. You're not just looking for treasure. You're uncovering a story that's been hidden for generations. And it will change everything you thought you knew. Maddie's heart pounded as she rolled the map back up and tucked it into her jacket. The path ahead was clear, the hollow. But something deep inside her told her that they weren't just uncovering a treasure. They were uncovering the truth. And that truth had the power to change their lives forever. The journey to the hollow was nothing short of eerie. The mist, which had followed them from the chapel, thickened as they ventured deeper into Weathersby Wood. The trees grew taller and closer together, their gnarled branches twisting into strange shapes, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out in front of them. The map Maddie held in her hands was the only guide they had, and as they neared the coordinates marked on it, her excitement mixed with a growing unease. They had passed through the parts of the wood they knew well, familiar trails where birds chirped and sunlight filtered through the leaves. But the further they ventured, the less familiar it all felt. The sounds of the forest were muted here, as though even the creatures were hesitant to tread too close to whatever lay in the hollow. Maddie looked back at her family. Arthur led the way, his weathered face set in a grim determination, while Mark and Clara followed closely behind, their eyes darting around warily. Scout, as usual, was ahead of them, nose to the ground, his tail wagging cautiously but with purpose. "This place feels wrong," Clara said quietly, her voice low and strained. She held her coat tighter around her as the chill in the air grew more intense. "It's like the woods are closing in on us." Mark glanced at her, his brows furrowed. "It's just the isolation. The hollow's been avoided for years, maybe even centuries. People talk about it, but no one dares to go near it. There are always stories, that there's something unnatural about this part of the wood." Arthur stopped suddenly, and the others came to a halt behind him. His eyes were scanning the trees ahead, as though something had caught his attention. His gaze lingered on a thick patch of ivy covering the roots of a massive oak. "It's close now," Arthur murmured. Just beyond that thicket. Maddie's heart skipped a beat. She had been waiting for this moment, yet the closer they got to the hollow, the more she could feel a weight pressing on her chest, as if something ancient was watching them. Something that had been waiting for them to arrive. The path ahead became less distinct as they moved further into the thicket. The trees grew twisted and contorted, their trunks covered in strange moss that pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible glow. Maddie couldn't explain it, but the glow made the place feel alive, as though the forest itself had been waiting for them. "Stay close," Arthur ordered, his voice low but firm. They pushed through the underbrush, the sounds of their footsteps the only noise that broke the silence. Then, ahead of them, something emerged through the fog. The ground seemed to open up into a wide clearing. The trees parted to reveal a large stone structure, half hidden beneath the tangled roots of enormous trees. Its shape was unmistakable, a long-forgotten shrine or altar, ancient and covered in moss, but still standing tall. "This is it," Arthur whispered, stepping forward into the clearing. Maddie couldn't take her eyes off the shrine. Its surface was covered in weathered carvings, symbols she had never seen before, patterns that matched the ones from the chest and the map. She felt as though she had stumbled upon something sacred, something lost to time. "This place, it's not just the treasure," Arthur said softly. "This is the heart of the Ivy Wolves. They didn't just hide something here. They protected it. And I think it's more than just knowledge. It's something that could change everything, for good or ill." Mark looked around, his expression unreadable. "What are these markings? What are they trying to tell us?" Arthur scanned the shrine, his fingers brushing lightly over the symbols. They're a map of sorts, but they're more than that. These carvings are part of a warning, a key to understanding the power hidden here. Maddie stepped closer to the shrine, her flashlight illuminating the intricate patterns. Then, her eyes locked onto something at the base of the stone structure, a large, circular indentation, worn down by time. It looked like a place meant for something to fit, something that had been lost. This is the last clue, Maddie said, her voice filled with certainty. The map, the chest, the symbols, they've all led us here. We need to find what fits inside. Arthur studied the indentation with a furrowed brow.
Yes.
It's a lock, a way to open what's hidden beneath the surface. Mark crouched down beside Maddie. But where's the key? Arthur's gaze darkened. That's the real question, isn't it? If the Ivy Wolves wanted to protect something so powerful, they wouldn't just leave it lying around. There's a key somewhere, a piece to this puzzle. Clara shook her head, her voice tinged with frustration. I don't understand. We've found the shrine, but there's nothing here. No key. No treasure. Just more questions. We're missing something, Maddie said, her eyes scanning the area around them. She could feel it in her gut. The answer was right there, hidden in plain sight, just like everything else had been. Scout barked again, this time more urgently, as if something had caught his attention. He darted toward a patch of ivy near the base of the shrine and began pawing at the ground. That's it, Maddie exclaimed. Scout found something. The family hurried over, and Maddie knelt beside the dog. She gently pulled back the ivy, revealing a small, weathered stone that seemed out of place in the natural setting of the shrine. It was shaped like a key, though unlike any key Maddie had ever seen before. Its surface was engraved with the same markings as the shrine, the same wolf and ivy symbols. Arthur's eyes widened in recognition. That's it. That's the key. Maddie reached down and picked it up. It was heavy, solid in her hand. She stood and walked toward the circular indentation in the shrine. The key fit perfectly. With a soft click, the stone structure rumbled, and a section of the shrine's base slid open, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside, nestled in the darkness, was a small wooden box. It was old, its surface cracked and weathered, but unmistakably there, the treasure that the Ivy Wolves had protected for centuries. Maddie felt a rush of triumph, but also a profound sense of awe. What was inside that box? What secrets had the Ivy Wolves kept hidden, and why had they chosen to protect them in such a way? As she reached for the box, Arthur's voice stopped her. Maddie, whatever is inside that box, you need to understand. It's not just a treasure. It's a piece of our history. It's something that could change everything. Maddie's fingers brushed the lid of the box, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. She had come so far, and now, she was about to uncover the secret that had been buried for centuries. The lid creaked open, and the light from their flashlights spilled onto the contents inside. Maddie's fingers trembled as she lifted the lid of the wooden box. The air around her seemed to hold its breath, as though the world itself was waiting for her to uncover whatever lay within. Her flashlight beam danced across the interior of the box, revealing its contents, a small, intricately carved stone sphere, no bigger than a fist. The sphere was unlike anything she had ever seen. Its surface was smooth, but etched with hundreds of tiny symbols, patterns that seemed to shift and change as her light passed over them. The more she looked, the more the markings seemed to come alive, glowing faintly with an inner light. It was as though the sphere had a pulse, a quiet, rhythmic beat that matched her own racing heart. What is it? Mark whispered, his voice full of awe and confusion. It looks ancient. Arthur stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the sphere. This is no ordinary artifact. This is the heart of the Ivy Wolves' legacy. The very reason they hid it so well. This is what they were protecting. Maddie felt the weight of Arthur's words settle over her. The heart of the Ivy Wolves' legacy. The secrets of their people, their history, and perhaps something far more powerful than they had imagined. Clara's voice broke the heavy silence. But what does it do? Why keep it hidden all this time? Arthur's face was drawn with deep contemplation. I'm not sure, but I have a feeling that this sphere holds knowledge that has been lost for centuries. It could change the way we understand this land, the people who lived here, and perhaps even our place in history. Maddie held the sphere in her hands, feeling its strange energy coursing through her fingertips. It was warm, almost as if it were alive. The symbols on its surface glowed brighter as she rotated it, and for a moment, she swore she could hear whispers, soft, barely audible, like a forgotten language. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Arthur's eyes narrowed. "I did. It's almost as if it's calling to you." She didn't know how to explain it, but the whispers seemed familiar, like echoes from the past calling her name. She knew she had to understand what the sphere meant, what it wanted. "Should we open it?" Maddie asked, glancing up at her grandfather. Arthur's expression was unreadable. "If this sphere is what I think it is, we must approach it with great care. It could hold answers to questions we've never thought to ask. Or it could unleash something we're not ready to face." Despite his caution, Arthur's eyes betrayed a flicker of excitement. There was a part of him, a part that Maddie knew well, that couldn't resist the pull of history, of discovery. And this was the ultimate discovery. "I think we need to try," Maddie said. "We can't just leave it here. We've come too far." The group gathered around, each of them feeling the weight of the moment. Maddie placed the sphere carefully on the ground before her, trying to steady her hands. The markings on the stone shifted again, and for a brief moment, a bright light flashed from within the sphere, blinding them all. Then, just as quickly as it had come, the light faded. And in its place, a faint outline appeared on the surface of the stone. A map. It was a map of Weathersby Wood, but not like any map they had ever seen before. This one was detailed, showing the paths of ancient trails long forgotten, hidden caves, and secret chambers buried beneath the earth. There were locations marked with symbols, each one similar to the wolf and ivy motif. And at the center of the map was a large, dark circle, a place marked with the word, the heart. Maddie's breath caught in her throat. The heart. Arthur bent down to examine the map, his fingers tracing the markings. The heart, it must be what the ivy wolves were protecting. The core of their power. The place where everything began. Mark stepped forward, squinting at the map. "But this is impossible. I've lived here my whole life, and I've never seen any of these places." Clara was silent, but her expression was filled with disbelief. "How can this be? We've searched the woods for so long, and all this time, this has been here, hidden from us." Arthur stood up straight, his face grim. "This is why they kept it hidden. The ivy wolves understood that the power of the heart was too great for any one person to control. They sealed it away, ensuring that only those worthy would ever find it. And now we're the ones who found it," Maddie finished for him, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. "We're the ones who have to decide what happens next." Arthur nodded, his expression dark.
"Yes, but be warned, Maddie.
"If the heart is what I believe it is, it holds not just knowledge but power. And there are others who would stop at nothing to claim it." Maddie's mind raced. She knew the journey had already changed everything for her family, but now, it felt as though they had crossed into another realm entirely. They had uncovered something that could alter the course of history, something that many would kill to possess. "But who else knows about it?" Maddie asked. "Who would want to take it?" Arthur's eyes hardened. "That's the real question.
And it's one we'll have to answer soon."
The ivy wolves were right to keep it hidden, but we've found it, and now we must decide whether we're worthy to keep it." They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of their discovery settling in. The wind howled softly through the trees, and Maddie could feel the pull of the heart, its power reaching out to her in ways she couldn't explain. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear. The secret of the ivy wolves was no longer just a piece of history. It was a living, breathing force that had the potential to change everything. And now it was in their hands. The forest around them had grown eerily still, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Maddie could feel it, the weight of the heart's power pressing on her chest, urging her to make a decision. The stone sphere lay in her hands, its surface now calm and unremarkable, but Maddie knew better than to believe its stillness meant peace. The map inside it had shown them the heart's location, but it had also shown the hidden dangers surrounding it. The air felt charged, heavy with unspoken threats. She glanced up at her grandfather, who was scanning the woods with sharp eyes, his face a mix of awe and wariness. "We need to get back to the house," Arthur said suddenly, his voice low but commanding. "We can't stay out here for long. Not with what we've found." Maddie nodded, though she didn't want to leave the shrine. It had become a place of revelation, a link to the past, but she knew they had to move quickly. What they had uncovered, the map, the heart, was something much bigger than they had anticipated. It wasn't just about treasure anymore. It was about something far more powerful, something that could change the world. As they made their way back through the woods, Maddie's mind raced. Who else was searching for the heart?
What did they want with it?
And how far would they go to get it? Her thoughts were interrupted by a rustling sound behind them. She froze, and Scout's ears perked up, his nose twitching. The dog let out a low growl, his body tense. Arthur held up a hand, signaling for silence. "We're not alone." Maddie felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't just the quiet of the forest that had changed. There was something else, something lurking just beyond their sight. She glanced over her shoulder, trying to peer through the trees, but the mist was thick, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. "I don't see anything," Mark said, his voice cautious. He had his hand on the hilt of his pocketknife, ready for whatever might emerge from the shadows. Arthur's eyes narrowed, and he motioned for them to keep moving. "Stay close. And be quiet. Whoever is out there is looking for something, and I don't intend to let them find it." The family pressed on, their footsteps quick but measured, their breaths shallow as the forest seemed to close in around them. The rustling continued behind them, just enough to keep them on edge, but nothing materialized. It was as if the very air had grown thicker, darker, as if something malevolent was closing in. Finally, they reached the clearing near the house, and Arthur led them quickly toward the barn, where they could regroup and plan their next move. As they entered the barn, Arthur sealed the door behind them and turned to face the group. "This is getting dangerous," he said, his voice grave. "We've uncovered something powerful, and now we're not the only ones who know about it." "What do you mean?" Clara asked, her face pale. "Who else is out there?" Arthur took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room. The Ivy Wolves didn't just protect the heart because of its knowledge. They kept it hidden because of its power. And there are people, organizations, who would stop at nothing to possess it. Mark looked troubled. "Are we talking about the same people who might have been watching us in the woods?" Arthur nodded.
Yes.
"They've been following us, probably since we unearthed the chest in the garden. They've been waiting for the right moment to strike." Maddie's stomach churned. "But who are they? Why do they want the heart?" "That's the real question," Arthur said. The Ivy Wolves were a secretive order, their ways lost to history. They guarded the heart because they believed it contained something more than just power. It held the ability to influence people, to change history itself. Whoever controls the heart controls the past and the future. Clara shook her head. "That sounds impossible. It's just a stone." Arthur looked at her with a serious expression. "It may look like a stone, but it's much more than that. It's a key, a conduit to something ancient, something that the world has forgotten. And if we don't figure out who's after it, we'll be caught in a battle we're not prepared for." Maddie's mind was racing. Everything her grandfather had said made sense, but the weight of it all was starting to suffocate her. The Ivy Wolves had chosen her family for a reason, but what was that reason? Why had they entrusted them with the heart? Were they meant to protect it? Or were they the ones who would use it for their own purposes? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps outside the barn made everyone freeze. Scout growled low, his teeth bared as the sound drew closer. Arthur's hand shot out, motioning for silence. "Stay still. Don't make a sound." The family held their breath as the footsteps grew louder. Whoever was outside had to be close, and the silence was thick with tension. Then, a shadow passed by the window, and the barn door creaked. The door slowly swung open, and standing in the doorway was a figure cloaked in black, their face obscured by a hood. Maddie's heart raced. This wasn't someone they knew. This wasn't someone from the village. It was someone who had been watching them, someone who had been waiting for this moment. "Who are you?" Arthur demanded, his voice low but authoritative. The figure didn't speak, but instead stepped into the barn, their movements deliberate. Behind them, several more cloaked figures emerged, their presence imposing, their silence unnerving. One of the figures raised a hand, and suddenly, the barn door slammed shut, trapping them inside. "Your time has come," a voice echoed from beneath the hood, its tone cold and clipped. "The heart belongs to us, and you will hand it over, now." The barn felt like it was closing in around them, the air thick with tension. Maddie's heart pounded as she stared at the figures in the doorway, cloaked in shadows. They were not ordinary strangers. They radiated an aura of danger and power. The way they moved, the way they spoke, it was as if they had been waiting for this moment for years. Arthur stepped forward, his face set in defiance, though his eyes were filled with concern. "You won't get away with this," he said, his voice steady but fierce. The hooded figure in the front gave a low, almost amused chuckle. "You're not in a position to make demands, old man. The heart is ours by right. Hand it over." Maddie's grip on the stone sphere tightened. The power inside it pulsed against her palms, like it was calling to her, urging her to make a decision. She had always been told that power was dangerous, that it could corrupt. But now she understood. The heart wasn't just a relic, it was a force, and in her hands, it could either protect or destroy. She exchanged a glance with Arthur. Her grandfather's expression was filled with a silent plea. "Don't give it to them. We're not just protecting the heart. We're protecting everything it represents." The cloaked figure shifted, and one stepped forward, his voice dripping with malice. "We don't want to hurt you, but if we must, we will. The heart is ours. You can't stop us." Maddie felt a surge of determination. She could feel the power of the heart coursing through her, its warmth spreading through her fingers. This wasn't just about stopping these strangers. It was about protecting everything that had been hidden, everything that had been guarded for centuries. The heart wasn't meant to be wielded by anyone, not by these men, not by her. It was meant to be protected. "I won't let you take it," Maddie said firmly, her voice stronger than she felt. She raised the heart high, and the room seemed to hum with energy. The symbols on its surface began to glow with a bright, radiant light. The cloaked figures recoiled, shielding their eyes from the blinding glow. "What is this?" one of them hissed, panic creeping into his voice. "I don't know," Maddie said, "but I'm not letting you control it." The light from the heart flared brighter, its energy flooding the barn and spilling out into the woods beyond. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the walls of the barn seemed to bend and stretch with the force of the power that was being unleashed. For a moment, everything around them felt alive, the trees, the very earth, as if the heart's energy had awakened something ancient within the land. The hooded figures backed away, their faces contorted with fear. "You can't control it," one of them shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "The heart is a force of nature. You'll never be able to wield it." But Maddie wasn't listening to them. She closed her eyes, focusing on the energy in her hands, feeling its flow. The heart was not meant for domination. It was meant to be a catalyst for change, for protection. She understood now that she didn't need to wield it. She needed to release it. With a final surge of willpower, Maddie whispered a single word, the one that had been hidden in the symbols all along. "Release." And then, in an instant, the power of the heart exploded outward. The force was unlike anything Maddie had ever felt before. It was a tidal wave of light and energy, overwhelming in its intensity. The cloaked figures were thrown back by the blast, their forms vanishing into the light like shadows. The barn shook, and the very air around them seemed to hum with the heartbeat of the earth itself. Maddie collapsed to her knees, the heart slipping from her grasp as the light began to fade. She could hear her family's voices calling her name, but it was as if they were coming from a distant place. When the light finally dimmed, everything fell silent. Maddie slowly opened her eyes, her body sore but alive. The heart was gone. In its place was nothing but a soft glow that seemed to linger in the air. The barn was intact, but the cloaked figures were nowhere to be seen. Arthur was kneeling beside her, his face full of concern. "Maddie, are you okay?" I think I did it," she whispered, her voice hoarse. The others gathered around her, their faces filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Mark reached down and helped her to her feet. "What happened? Where did it go?" "I released it," Maddie said softly, staring at the space where the heart had been. "I think it's gone for good. But I didn't control it. It's free now." Arthur looked around, his eyes searching the woods beyond the barn. "And what about them? The ones who were after it?" "They're gone," Maddie said with quiet certainty. "I think they've been stopped." Clara let out a long breath, her shoulders sagging in relief. "We're safe. For now," Arthur said, his voice tinged with both caution and hope. But the heart wasn't meant to be controlled. It's a force of nature, a reminder that some things are too powerful for anyone to possess. We may not know everything about it, but we know one thing: it's not ours to keep. Maddie nodded slowly. The heart had never been a treasure to be claimed. It had been a secret, a warning, a force that had shaped the history of Weathersbywood long before they had come into the picture. And now it was no longer theirs to protect. But in releasing it, Maddie had ensured that its power was returned to the earth, where it belonged. She had done what the Ivy Wolves had intended, protected the heart, not through possession, but through understanding. "We did the right thing," Maddie said, her voice steady. Arthur gave her a proud smile, his eyes filled with both pride and sadness. "Yes, Maddie, you did." And as they walked back to the house, the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees, Maddie felt a sense of peace settle over her. They had uncovered the heart secret, and now it was free. And perhaps, in the end, that was the greatest treasure of all.